8 months ago, Zoe and I ended our marriage. It wasn't just a regular breakup, it was messy, bitter, and full of arguments. At the time, Zoe was a stay-at-home mom looking after our son, Jason. When we first got married, both of us shared this beautiful dream of starting a family. We couldn't wait to have kids and thought it would happen naturally, but life had other plans. Conceiving turned out to be much harder than we expected, and that struggle really took a toll on Zoe. She carried a deep sense of guilt, feeling like she was failing us because she couldn't get pregnant right away. It didn't matter how many times I told her it wasn't her fault, or how often I reminded her we had all the time in the world to conceive. Zoe became fixated on solving this problem as if this was some puzzle she could crack with the right formula. She dove headfirst into researching ways to improve fertility. She tried every home remedy she could find, read countless articles, and even made drastic changes to her diet. Not only that, but she also had me change my diet, cutting out certain foods and adding new ones she swore would help with my sperm count and libido. Every day it felt like there was a new plan or routine she wanted us to follow, and her determination was relentless. At first, I tried to be supportive. I wanted to make her feel better and show her that we were in this together. But after a while, it became overwhelming. The constant focus on getting pregnant felt all-consuming, and I started to feel drained. As much as I wanted to have a child, I believed we needed to take our time and let things happen naturally. My more relaxed approach, however, didn't sit well with Zoe. She saw it as a lack of care on my part, which only fueled more tension between us. We'd argue frequently, with her accusing me of not wanting a baby as much as she did, even though that wasn't true at all. Eventually, after weeks and weeks of trying, we finally got the news we had been waiting for. Zoe was pregnant. I was over the moon and thought that this would finally bring her some peace of mind and allow her to relax. But instead of calming down, she became even more obsessive. Her focus shifted from getting pregnant to ensuring everything about the pregnancy was perfect. After Zoe got pregnant, her stress levels seemed to skyrocket. Every hour of every day, she would obsess over making sure the pregnancy was as safe and flawless as possible. She devoured book after book about pregnancy and parenting, especially ones aimed at first-time mothers. At first, I admired her dedication, but it didn't take too long for her fears to often spiral into irrational territory. She worried about things that seemed far-fetched or unlikely, but in her mind, they were very real threats. I did my best to calm her down, to reassure her that everything would be okay, but I also tried to remind myself that she wasn't acting this way to be difficult. She was scared. She desperately wanted to be a good mom and to do everything right, and I could see how much pressure she was putting on herself. Then, about 4 months into her pregnancy, Zoe made a decision that caught me completely off guard. She quit her job without even talking to me first. This wasn't some small choice. It was a huge, life-altering decision that affected both of us. At the time, we had a mortgage, student loans, and plenty of other bills to juggle. My salary was decent, and we were getting by, but it wasn't enough to leave much room for extras once all the essentials were paid for. Losing her income added a lot of strain to our finances, and what frustrated me most was that she didn't think to consult me before making such a big move. I suddenly felt like I was carrying the weight of everything alone. And while I understood that she wanted to focus on the pregnancy, I really wished she had talked to me about it first. When Zoe became a stay-at-home wife, I thought that maybe this would help her relax. I figured she wouldn't have to deal with the stress of work anymore, and she could focus on herself and the baby. But things didn't improve. If anything, her anxiety seemed to get worse. Every day there was a new worry, a new fear, or something that didn't go the way she wanted. At this point, I suggested her to go and see a therapist to help her process her feelings and ease some of the pressure she was putting on herself. But she refused. She didn't want to talk to anyone about what she was going through, and instead, she doubled down on trying to control every little thing. Her behavior became more dramatic and, at times, downright unreasonable. For example, when it came time to set up the baby's nursery, she decided it had to be painted in one specific color. Nothing else would do. But when we couldn't find that exact shade in the store, she completely lost it. She started crying, yelling, and creating a scene right there in public. It was like watching a toddler throwing a tantrum. I felt embarrassed, frustrated, and unsure of how to calm her down. Another time, we went out to eat at a restaurant, and it turned into a nightmare. Zoe had this long list of specific demands about her meal, what ingredients could and couldn't be used, how the food had to be prepared, and even what utensils should touch her plate. She even told the staff she was allergic to certain ingredients, which I knew for a fact she wasn't. When the food finally came, Zoe didn't like its taste and actually threatened to sue the restaurant for not meeting her standards. I was left mortified. After that, I stopped taking her out to restaurants and would get takeout instead. During her pregnancy, I was also responsible for grocery shopping, as Zoe felt she shouldn't be doing that. Generally, I'd get a list from her every weekend, head to the store, and stock our pantry with everything she had asked for. It seemed simple enough, but of course it wasn't. During the middle of the week, Zoe would randomly call me when I would still be at work and demand that I go and pick up some specific item that she was suddenly craving. These were often items that she didn't include in her grocery lists. If I couldn't leave work immediately and didn't get the item to her right away, she would get upset and accuse me of not caring about her needs. Please keep in mind her cravings were relentless, no matter how much effort I put into keeping the house fully stocked. It was never enough for her. There was always something missing, something new she wanted, and it always had to be handled immediately. By the time those 9 months were up, I was completely worn out. I felt like I was living with a completely different person. Zoe's stress, fears, and controlling behavior were overshadowing what should have been one of the happiest times of our lives. It felt like the pregnancy was consuming not just her, but our entire relationship. Every day, despite how exhausting it all was, I tried to keep my mouth shut and just did what Zoe wanted me to do. I told myself over and over again that she was only acting this way because of the pregnancy. I thought the stress, the hormones, and the anxiety were making her behave like this, and that after pregnancy she would be back to normal. So I gritted my teeth and did everything I could to keep her happy. However, from the moment Jason was born, something felt off with Zoe. The first time the nurse tried to place him in her arms, she turned away and refused to hold him. At first, I didn't think much of it. She had just gone through labor, and I figured she was probably exhausted and overwhelmed. I told myself it was normal for new mothers to need a little time to recover before bonding with their baby. I let her rest, assuming that after a good sleep, she'd feel more like herself. But that didn't happen. Every time the nurses brought Jason to her, she had this disgusted look on her face, like she couldn't bear to be near him. It was heartbreaking to see. I tried to be patient, thinking maybe it was just the hormones or the stress of the birth, but deep down, I started to worry. When we brought Jason home, things didn't improve. Zoe wouldn't hold him, wouldn't caress him, wouldn't even give him a simple kiss. She stayed distant, almost as if he wasn't there. It was hard to watch, but I didn't have much time to dwell on it. Thankfully, I had taken a few weeks off from work to help care for the baby, so I took on most of the responsibilities. I was the one changing diapers, holding him when he cried, and cuddling with him during those quiet moments when he just wanted to be close to someone. Feeding him was another battle. Zoe didn't want to nurse him, and it took a lot of convincing on my part to get her to even try. When she finally agreed, it was clear she was doing it reluctantly, and she didn't show any warmth or affection during those moments. I was at my wit's end. I didn't understand why she was acting this way. I wanted to believe she'd eventually bond with Jason, that it was just taking her a little longer to adjust to motherhood. But the longer it went on, the more it felt like she had no intention of connecting with him. When my paternity leave ended and it was time for me to go back to work, the situation reached a breaking point. Zoe completely broke down, saying she wasn't capable enough of taking care of Jason on her own. She insisted she couldn't handle it. I didn't know what else to do, so I called my mom and asked for her help. Thankfully, my mother started coming over to our house to help Zoe care for Jason while I was at work. It gave me some peace of mind knowing that at least someone was there to make sure Jason was being cared for. My mom was a lifesaver during that time, stepping in where Zoe wouldn't. But even with my mom's help, one thing was glaringly obvious. Zoe was completely detached from our son. She acted as if he wasn't her child, as if he was just some responsibility she had no interest in. It wasn't just me who noticed it. My mom saw it too. We both became increasingly concerned about Zoe's behavior. Clearly, she was going through some mental issues and we wanted to get her the right help. We encouraged her to talk to someone, to open up about how she was feeling, and to maybe get some professional help. We thought that if she could just express what was going on inside her, it might help her work through it and connect with Jason. But getting Zoe to agree to that was another battle entirely. She flat out refused to acknowledge that anything was wrong. Rather than going to counseling or even talking to someone about how she was feeling, Zoe started spending her nights out with her single friends. It wasn't just the occasional dinner or night out either. She would stay out all night and come home completely drunk, sometimes barely able to stand. When I tried to talk to her about it and tried to ask why she was behaving this way, she'd snap. She'd yell at me, screaming things like, "I've done my part. I gave birth to him, and now it's your turn to raise him." Hearing her say that broke something inside me. It wasn't just the words, it was the coldness behind them, the way she dismissed both me and Jason as if we didn't matter. Since she clearly wasn't interested in being a stay-at-home mom, I thought maybe going back to work would give her a sense of purpose again. I was barely holding things together financially on just my income, and I hoped that easing her back into work might not only help us financially, but also give her a new routine to focus on. But Zoe had no interest in that either. When I brought it up, she mocked me, saying I wasn't man enough to take care of her and Jason in my income. She told me I needed to step up and get a better job so she wouldn't have to work at all. I couldn't believe how unreasonable she was being. I tried to explain how I was already doing everything I could, working full-time, taking care of Jason, and managing the household. I pointed out that she wasn't contributing in any way, neither as a mother nor as a partner. But nothing I said seemed to matter. Zoe wasn't interested in helping. She wasn't interested in Jason, in me, or even in finding her own path forward. This went on for a year, a whole year of me juggling everything, work, parenting, and the house, while Zoe drifted through her days without any sense of purpose. She spent her nights out with friends and her days either sleeping off the hangovers or scrolling through her phone. I was exhausted, physically and emotionally. Every day felt like I was running on fumes, doing everything I could to keep our lives afloat while she did nothing to help. I remember one night in particular that sticks with me. I had just gotten home from work after another long, draining day. Jason was already asleep, thanks to my mom, who had stepped in yet again to help me out. Instead of going straight inside, I sat in the parking garage of our house, and for the first time in a long while, I broke down. I just sat there crying in my car, feeling completely overwhelmed by the weight of it all. I felt so tired of being the only adult in our relationship. Tired of carrying the burden of everything while Zoe lived as if she had no responsibilities. I kept asking myself the same questions over and over. Why wasn't she happy? Why wasn't she taking care of Jason? Why did she seem to enjoy being with her friends more than being with us? The part that hurt the most was the betrayal of it all. Zoe had been the one who wanted a baby so badly. She was the one who had obsessed over getting pregnant, who had put us both through the emotional ringer just to make it happen. And now? Now she was acting like Jason wasn't even her child, like none of this was what she wanted. I couldn't make sense of it. And the harder I tried, the more lost I felt. After that, I talked with my mom. And that very weekend, after dropping Jason off at her place, I went back home to have a long, overdue conversation with Zoe. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I laid everything out for her, my feelings, my frustrations, my exhaustion. I told her how much I was struggling and how much I needed her support and how I couldn't keep carrying the weight of our family all by myself. I thought that if I was honest and vulnerable, maybe she'd finally understand. Maybe she'd see how much her behavior was hurting, not just me, but our son too. But instead of compassion or even acknowledgement, Zoe laughed. She laughed right in my face. I'll never forget that moment. It was like she wasn't even hearing me, like everything I said was just some big joke to her. She told me I was being a wimp and making a big deal out of nothing. Then she launched into a tirade about how thousands of women were stay-at-home wives and how I should be grateful for the life I had with her. I tried to reason with her, explaining that most stay-at-home wives actually contribute. They take care of the household, raise their children, and support their families in meaningful ways. Zoe wasn't doing any of that. She wasn't contributing to the house, wasn't helping raise Jason, and was wasting our money on shopping and alcohol. But no matter how I tried to frame it, she refused to see my point. Zoe argued back that I was being unreasonable for complaining and that she liked the way things were. She even suggested I could get a part-time job on the weekend if I was so concerned about finances. I couldn't believe the nerve of her. She then doubled down, saying I should just calm down and stop overthinking, insisting that plenty of her friends lived just like her. Hearing those words, her complete dismissal of my feelings and her refusal to take any responsibility pushed me over the edge. I felt a surge of anger I hadn't allowed myself to feel until that moment. I told her point blank that I didn't care if her friends were lazy and living off their husbands. Maybe their husbands were okay with it, but I wasn't. I told her that if this was the kind of life she wanted, a life of doing nothing, contributing nothing, and treating our marriage like a one-sided transaction, then I couldn't be her free meal ticket anymore. I told her with as much clarity as I could muster that she had stopped being my partner a long time ago. She no longer contributed to my life in any meaningful way. And if this was how she wanted to live, then I wanted no part of it. I told her to pack her bags and leave because I wanted a divorce. Zoe was completely taken aback. She acted like I was insane for even suggesting it, as if I was the one in the wrong for standing up for myself. What followed was one of the worst fights we ever had. She screamed at me, yelled so loud the neighbors could probably hear, and started breaking things around the house. She even went outside and scratched my car in a fit of rage. It was chaos, but I stood my ground. I refused to back down. In the end, she packed up her things and left. After she moved out, though, I started hearing from her friends and family. They call me all kinds of names, an a-hole, a bad husband, an ungrateful man. They couldn't understand why I would ask for a divorce. They only heard Zoe's version of the story, and none of them bothered to ask me how hard it had been to live with her. Zoe would even text me during those days after our initial separation and talk about how glad she was that we were not together anymore and how she was going to be able to enjoy her single life to the fullest and find her real self. When the divorce proceedings began, I knew the custody battle was going to be the hardest part. Zoe, despite everything, decided to fight tooth and nail to take Jason away from me, but I was prepared. I had gathered enough evidence to prove her irresponsibility and lack of involvement as a mother. There were countless instances: her refusal to take care of Jason, her late-night partying, her behavior during the pregnancy, and her neglect afterward that I presented to the court. Thankfully, the judge saw through her act. They could see the reality of the situation, and in the end, I was awarded full custody of Jason. Zoe was given supervised visitation rights and was also ordered to pay child support. That decision brought me immense relief because I knew Jason's well-being was no longer at risk. Zoe, of course, was furious about the outcome. She tried to argue that she was unemployed and couldn't afford child support, claiming she was unable to find a job. But that was just another one of her lies. The court wasn't buying it and ordered her to find employment quickly and start contributing financially to Jason's upbringing. Anyway, it's been 8 months since the divorce was finalized, and in all that time, Zoe hasn't contacted me, not once. She hasn't called to ask about Jason, hasn't inquired about his health or well-being, and hasn't tried to visit him. It's like she completely erased him and me from her life. But then, out of the blue, she called me yesterday. I was shocked to see her name pop up on my phone, and when I answered, it was clear she was drunk. Calling me from her sister's wedding, she was slurring her words and barely coherent. She started rambling, telling me how much she regretted divorcing me. She admitted she hadn't been able to find anyone better than me, despite trying. She went on to share how she'd met over 80 men on dating apps after our divorce, but that none of them were good enough for her. She said how she had made it clear to all of them that she wanted to be a stay-at-home wife without kids, but that none of them had agreed to meet her demands. She kept complaining about how there were no real men left in the world anymore who could provide her with the lifestyle she expected. She kept insisting that she was willing to forgive me and start afresh if I agreed to get over our past. I made it very clear that I had no interest in rekindling anything with her. That chapter is over. It was late at night, so I ended the call without talking to her further. When I woke up today, there were multiple missed calls and texts from her. Zoe thinks I was rude and inconsiderate for not even giving her a chance. She believes I'm being selfish as a father and insists that for the sake of our son, I should consider taking her back so we can be a whole family again. AITA if I don't even consider this? Update 1. For everyone asking, not only has my ex-wife not reached out to me for months, but she also hasn't checked in on our son at all. Since our divorce, she hasn't visited him once, and it feels like she's completely forgotten about him. She hasn't asked about him or made any effort to see him, and on top of that, she has never paid any child support. I could take her back to court and make her pay, but I haven't because, honestly, after leaving her, it feels like a weight has been lifted off my chest. I can finally breathe and be the kind of father my son needs. I'm able to spend more quality time with him, and I'm so grateful for my mom's support through all of this. I didn't want any involvement with my ex-wife, which is why I haven't engaged with her until now. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update, and today my ex-wife Zoe unexpectedly showed up at my place. I had been avoiding her calls and texts ever since she drunkenly called me from her sister's wedding. I figured that if I gave her the silent treatment, she would eventually quiet down and move on. Clearly that didn't happen. The moment I opened the door, she demanded to know why I hadn't been responding to her attempts to contact me. She looked frustrated and impatient, her tone making it clear that she wasn't there for a casual conversation. I kept my composure and told her straight up that I wasn't interested in talking to her. I didn't mince my words. I told her I didn't care about her supposed change of heart and that I wasn't interested in rekindling anything with her. Zoe then brought up Jason. It was the first time in months she'd even mentioned him. She started asking questions about him, how he was doing, what he was like, how he was adjusting to life, and then she demanded to see him. I was taken aback. I pointed out how she hadn't made any effort to see Jason or even inquire about him all this time. I reminded her how she had distanced herself from him completely and never once bothered to reach out. But Zoe argued that she was still Jason's mother and that I had no right to stop her from seeing him now. She claimed she had learned from her mistakes and insisted she was a changed person now. She said she wanted to put in more effort to be a part of Jason's life and that she was ready to make amends for the time she had missed. I told her I needed time to think things over. I explained that this wasn't a decision I could make lightly, and she couldn't just expect to walk back into Jason's life as though nothing had happened. I asked her to leave and promised to call her in a few days to set up a date for her to visit Jason if I decided that it was the right thing to do. As much as I wish she would just stay out of our lives completely, I know deep down that Jason has a right to have a relationship with his mother. If she is genuinely committed to trying, I don't want to deprive him of that opportunity. But I also need to protect him from any unnecessary heartache or instability. And I'm not convinced Zoe is truly ready to be the parent Jason deserves. I am honestly at a fix. Update 3. It's been 4 months since my last update. For the past couple of months, I've allowed my ex-wife Zoe to visit and spend time with our son Jason. I had hoped that she was genuine about wanting to repair their relationship and be a better mother. At first, I did notice some positive changes in her behavior. She seemed more attentive to Jason, and I cautiously thought that she might be turning over a new leaf. However, every single time Zoe took Jason out to spend time with him, she would send me an itemized list of her expenses. I'm talking about everything: the food he ate, any small gifts she bought him, and even the clothes she decided to pick up for him. She wasn't just sharing these details for the sake of transparency. She actually expected me to reimburse her for every penny she spent while spending time with her own child. The audacity of it all left me speechless. I mean, I'm already the one raising Jason full time. I handle all his needs: food, clothing, school supplies, medical expenses, and more. On top of that, Zoe hasn't paid me a single cent of the child support that she's legally required to contribute. Yet here she was, expecting me to pay her for the privilege of spending time with our son. At first, I tried to ignore her ridiculous demands, simply refusing to pay. I figured she might eventually realize how absurd her expectations were, but she didn't. She kept sending me these bills after every visit as if she was doing me a favor by babysitting her own child. The situation came to a head this week when Zoe asked to take Jason to a family event. I agreed, wanting to give her another chance to bond with him. When she brought him back later that day, she handed me another detailed list of her expenses and expected me to pay up. This time, I didn't hold back. I laughed in her face and told her there was absolutely no way I was going to give her a single cent. She threatened to stop visiting Jason altogether, as if her presence in his life was some sort of favor she was doing for me. At that point, I had had enough. I told her plainly that if she didn't want to see Jason, That was her choice. I wasn't going to beg her to be in his life. It was she who claimed she wanted to repair her relationship with him, but I also made it crystal clear that this time I wouldn't hesitate to take her to court and make her pay all the backlogged child support she owed me. Zoe's eyes widened, and she argued that it was unfair because I was more financially stable than her. She claimed that the courts were wrong to ask her to pay in the first place, and that as a woman, she shouldn't be expected to cover any expenses for our son. Honestly, I've had enough of her ridiculous behavior. She's clearly taking both me and our son for granted. What kind of parent demands compensation for spending time with their own child? She acts more like a babysitter than a mother, and I have just had it. Now I'm going to make her pay quite literally. Update 4. It's been 3 months since my last update, and for anyone still waiting for an update, the court has ordered Zoe to pay the entire overdue child support that she owed. Yay! This time, the court has made it very clear that she is legally responsible for financially supporting our son also. And any further attempts to avoid her obligations would not be tolerated. Zoe fought me every step of the way, arguing that the financial burden was unfair and that I should take on the full responsibility of supporting Jason. She tried to play the victim as usual. And since the court ruling, Zoe has reluctantly started making the payments, though she still grumbles about it. She hasn't demanded money from me after spending time with Jason anymore. Jason, on the other hand, is still happy to spend time with his mother whenever she comes around. I do hope Zoe can show up consistently for him at least, because he deserves to have a mother who is present and engaged, not someone who treats her relationship with him like a transactional exchange. Stay tuned for more stories from our girl relationships.